them from airplanes, to torture and kill them in detention. So this is a very, very vicious war. But the terror doesn't seem to be working. And I think that is something that ultimately could be a fault line within the Tatmadaw itself, which is, the only way that the country can move forward is if there is a division within the army. Unfortunately, some of the regional actors do not want this. So we mentioned China, but Russia is also there and providing a lot of military weapon and support from Myanmar. Thailand would not like to see too much chaos on its border. India either. And none of these countries want to have the West coming back in the country. So the problem with this conflict, as many conflicts around the world, is not so much the domestic situation, which is pretty atrocious, but it's the fact you have so many external actors that do not have stake in the welfare and of the population. I think that's where the international community and the UN have to step up. It's been a neglected conflict for the last few years.
Kim, how would you describe what is currently going on? Is this a civil war, or is it a revolution against the military?
I think a revolution is perfectly apt term for this, because the main things that's happening is that this has been driven from the bottom up. This all began with mass strikes of the civil service, huge numbers of elected politicians, and then they formed alliances with civil society groups, women's organizations, all kinds of different stakeholders that had been fundamentally opposed to military rule and absolutely could not bear the thought of going back. They fled to ethnic resistance organizations, and although those EROs, as they're called, are often characterized as just interested in their autonomy, actually most of them have pretty ambitious revolutionary platforms focused on federal democracy, achieving rights of the people, and so on, because they've also suffered for so many decades under military rule. So I think that really has created an awakening, which has been attempted in previous generations, but now it's happened on social media, and there's been a real change of heart from many different people, that this is now the time to really rise up. And for a lot of the leaders, particularly the elected politicians, they never really chose to go into an armed revolution, as it were. It really happened from the bottom up, as so many people saw their lives being lost. Crackdowns began on protesters, and just these extremely sadistic, particularly evil kind of methods that we're seeing from the military have created a really strong response. And I'd say for at least a year, all of the main stakeholders have firmly believed that they can win this time. And I think that's been a really big change. And that's what's brought all kinds of different actors into a common purpose, even though some of them have different ideologies, different backgrounds, and in many cases, different kind of national identities, different languages and everything. But there's a real belief that this time, if they work together, the military can finally be removed. So it's absolutely a revolutionary movement. And I think if it's successful, or even if it's not successful in all of its aims, there's absolutely no way the country can go back to how it was before. So I think we're seeing serious transformational politics underway, which is in some ways more significant even than what we see on the battlefield.
Omar, let me bring you in on that point. So many different groups, and you heard Kim then say they all have slightly different aims. Is this potentially a problem? They all agree what they are against, the military junta, but do they all agree what they are for? And down the line, could this be problematic?
Well, this is the first time our people from different background, different ethnic, different religion, these communities ever had a chance to come together. So it is actually the process of coming together. So when they come together, this is the time that they are also already laying out the roadmap, political roadmap, what kind of federal democracy that we want to establish. So I think this is not something to be worried, because yes, you're right. They all have a very common goal of removing this military and bring to hold this military to account and all of that. But at the same time, there is a very common political vision that is already laid out in what we call as Federal Democracy Charter, and that is the baseline where these different ethnic communities, different minorities, majorities, all together, who've been oppressed oppressed by this military for 7 decades, now have a chance to come together. So a lot to discuss, but this is the greatest chance that our people ever had, where the people are actually already building this new Myanmar, new federal democratic Myanmar in the time of this active war, the terror campaign that military is actually launching against them. So I'm not worried, even though there is a time that people need to actually come together in this nation building process, but the chance that they are getting, this is the most important thing, that they are actually working hands in hands in the much stronger coordination than that you will see in the last 2 years, for example.
Nicholas, battles all around the edges, all around the borders, which is very worrying for anyone who's trying to control a country as the junta are. One assumes these rebel forces will now try to move to the centre, move to the urban areas. Tell us why the military aren't doing better here, because they have more firepower, don't they? They have more arms, they have superior artillery, they have air dominance. Why are they currently losing?
Well, I think one of the key issues is troops' morale. I think that the morale in the army is, very, very shaky. They have lost. The people are clearly on the side. I mean, there are no constituency that is for the military junta anymore. That really is the major difference with this coup, is that no one is in favor. The other thing is that in the previous era, when the recent era in which the junta was in power, they benefited from the gas boom. There were new gas fields that were found in the Indian Ocean, particularly in the Shui gas field in Chao Pyo in the Indian Ocean, and they built a pipeline that put this gas from Chao Pyo in the Indian Ocean to China. And that created an enormous amount of revenue. Foreign companies, Total and others invested. Thailand bought a lot of gas for the northern part of the country. And that sort of supported the junta's rule, and they were able to distribute, economic benefits to their cronies and within the army. But it is not the case anymore. The Shui gas field is running out. All the major companies have gone out. There are sanctions which are, not all, they're not what they should be, because the generals are still able to put a lot of money abroad, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Thailand, and so on. But it is sort of hurting their operation. And therefore, they don't have enough money to keep people on their side. And the biggest evidence we have of this is that they have now resorted to conscription, which is hugely unpopular. So they're going to round up people, force them to fight poorly. They've never shown any care for the foot soldiers. And this is why they sort of resort to this very violent tactics against civilians, and also the use of a few crack troops, right? You have a few crack troops who are actually very well trained. They're really killing machines. They don't, of course, obey any of the international humanitarian law provisions. But even this has its limits. And one group that has proved to be very able on the military front is this newish group, and Kemal can talk about it, is the Arakan army in Rakhine states. And they've been able to link up with the ethnic groups and build their military power, and they're inflicting defeat after defeat in Rakhine states to the military junta, which ultimately may also be a problem for a big component of the population here that we haven't mentioned yet, the Rohingya. And so there, the fracture lines among ethnic groups and that you mentioned, John, are, they are a concern, but definitely something that should be addressed. But at the moment, the junta really has nothing to offer in terms of a way out. And that's why the international community has to step up. And I think after, Guterres and the UN Secretary General and the international community were sort of hoping that ASEAN, the regional group, will try to help. And now I think we've run to a point where none of this has worked, and there need to be an agreement and a vision for the future at a higher level that involves, China, Russia, the UN Security Council, India, Thailand. Only if these actors sort of have a basic agreement, we'll be able to move forward. And I think that's why Guterres just named Julie Bishop, the former foreign minister from Australia, as its new special representative to try to sort of notch up the diplomatic activity over what to do with.
Let me bring in Omar on that. What would you like to see the international community do right now? What would you like to see Julie Bishop in her new role as an international envoy do?
I would really like to see the UN Security Council adopt a new resolution, a binding resolution under the UN Charter Chapter 7 to take action against this military. Because that's the way to really end this military tyranny and also end the people suffering on the ground, where Myanmar people will have a chance to start building this federal democracy sooner than later, while also the international community will be actually saving the people's lives on the ground. So that is exactly what we've been advocating for, but it's been very challenging because, as you can imagine, China and Russia in the UN Security Council, being the permanent member, having the veto power, always continue to be supporting this military junta, but also protecting the military junta from being held accountable by international law. So that's why we are approaching the international community, governments, individuals. We're looking for the champions of the democracy who actually want to protect the Myanmar people to step up and really come together to put more pressure on this military junta. Particularly, we're calling for the aviation fuel cut. Basically, we want the world to ban all the aviation fuel and aviation fuel chain so that this military has no more so that this military junta cannot bomb the people anymore, because that's the only thing that they have now, the only leverage the military junta has over the people's revolution. So that's what we want.
Let me bring in Kim quickly on those points, because are you really going to get the international community, and in many ways it's the UN Security Council that can act, when you've got China and Russia there? I noticed at the Security Council meeting held about a week ago, the Russian ambassador described the junta as our long-standing friend and close partner.
Yes, I think Russia in particular is a major bloc at the moment. I think that, though I agree with Omar, that you have to push from all angles for that to happen. I think that the whole UN system is realising that their kind of negligence, putting ASEAN at the front of the situation, despite ASEAN not being able to solve the issue, has not worked. And there really is a need for urgency among UN member states to push something through. And yeah, there's already a lot of pressure on aviation fuel, some of the steps that have been taken, but it's nowhere near enough. So it really is a case of just closing down some of those remaining loopholes and taking the extra steps. Because as Omar says, the junta has been a rump state for over a year now. It can't reach many locations from the ground. It has huge problems moving infantry troops around, most of whom are, veterans and retired people. A lot of them are poorly trained anyway, or now forced conscripts, as Nicola said. So we really are at a point where you've just got a military that's becoming increasingly isolated and bombing wildly, setting fire to markets, obliterating hospitals wherever they lose control. And much of the world is just kind of shrugging and hoping the whole thing goes away. But some much more decisive action is needed, because the writing has been on the wall for a long time now. There's no way, really no way, the junta can reverse this. But the problem is that it's got this huge buildup of troops over many decades. So it's extremely difficult to defeat wholesale. So you have this long, extremely violent conflict.
Thank you very much to all our guests today, Omar, Kim Jolliffe and Nicolas Bequelin. You can find plenty of background on the situation in Myanmar with reports, video and analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like your views too. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or if you prefer to message us on X, just look for @AJ Inside Story from the team here in Doha. Please stay safe. I'll be back here very soon. Bye-bye for now.
The latest news as it breaks.
The more important ends to the war in Gaza. It's a message they say they're going to carry on until they're listened to.
With detailed coverage.
The Israeli Prime Minister spoke this evening saying that the military is ready to invade Rafah despite criticisms from allies.
From the heart of the story.
Everyone is terrified, seeking shelter in this hospital for more than 6 months right now. Nowhere is safe and Palestinians are targeted.
They didn't want the average person to know what the truth was about climate change.
Scientists dismissed as prophets of doom. We knew where the temperature was going to go. By leaders seeking the profits of industry.
They were publishing reports saying this is not an urgent problem.
Could we have changed the course of the climate emergency?
Our air is polluted. Our skies are red.
Al Jazeera's new series, Dying Earth. Lost Futures.
Why have American evangelicals become Israel's strongest backer? Is U.S. President Joe Biden right to stand with Israel with no red line? As long as U.S. support continues, is there anything that can stop Israel's assault on Gaza from going on indefinitely?
A quizzical look at U.S. politics, the bottom line.
Ramadan is a time of mercy, transformation, worship, reward, where every good deed is multiplied by 70. It also brings mercy to the millions of people around the world who are suffering, trapped in brutal conflict, devastating disasters, and abject poverty. Donate your zakat to Human Appeal now to help save lives and transform communities.
Hello, I'm Marlene Saeed. This is the News Hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes. Israel's Prime Minister says a date's been set for a ground operation in Rafah just as the latest round of ceasefire talks come to an end in Cairo. Palestinians returning to their homes in Khan Yunis in Gaza find only bodies and rubble left by Israeli forces. Nicaragua takes Germany to court, arguing its supply of weapons to Israel amounts to aiding and abetting genocide.
I'm John Hendren in Indianapolis, where a partial eclipse of the sun has begun. But for those of us in the zone of totality, a total eclipse is coming.
And in sport, Carlo Ancelotti says mental strength will be the key to Real Madrid's chances when they take on Manchester City for the third straight season. City and Real are meeting in the Champions League, this time in the quarterfinals.
Hello, welcome to the program. It's 18 GMT and Israel's Prime Minister says a date has been set for his military's ground operation in Rafah in southern Gaza. That operation is what US President Joe Biden has previously called a red line. Benjamin Netanyahu says he's received a detailed update on the ceasefire talks underway in Cairo while reiterating threats of the looming offensive. Meanwhile, in southern Gaza, Israeli artillery fire has killed at least 8 Palestinians in Khan Yunis. Civilians returning to the city have found little to come back to, with many of their homes destroyed. And at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Nicaragua has accused Germany of aiding and abetting genocide being perpetrated in Gaza by supplying weapons to Israel. Let's go straight to Rory Challens, who is in occupied East Jerusalem. Rory, let's start with the ceasefire talks. What is the very latest you're hearing?
Well, I think there has been cautious optimism in the aftermath of those talks. Those talks broke up earlier with the delegates heading back to their respective seniors, taking a proposal that had been steered in large part by the United States. Now, the cautious optimism, I think, primarily come from the Egyptians and the Qataris, with the Qataris saying that this proposal looked to be a kind of three-phase deal, with some of it focused, or the first bit of it focused on humanitarian issues. The Egyptians saying that the two main sides, the Israelis and the Hamas, had agreed on kind of broad proposals. But once you got beyond the Egyptians and the Qataris, I think that optimism has started to fade significantly. Hamas has been grumbling that the Israelis haven't really shifted on their long-standing insistence that the war goes on and that the Rafah operation will happen and that there will be no withdrawal, full-scale withdrawal from Gaza to allow rebuilding to take place. In fact, one Hamas official in Beirut has even said already that ceasefire proposal is being rejected by the group. Others are still saying that they're going to carry on looking at it. And I think the Israelis are not particularly optimistic either. Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, has said that there are difficult decisions. And we have heard very recently from Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, who has been, I have to say, non-committal.
Right, as you say, we've just heard from him in the last hour or so. He is clearly putting pressure on these talks. What exactly has he said, Rory?
Well, there's clearly a lot of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu as well. There's pressure coming from the international community, most notably the United States, which has taken a much, much more active role in this round of negotiations than it has done in previous instances. And Netanyahu is under pressure from the far-right flanks of his own governing coalition. So yet again, those far-right flanks have restated their line in the sand, essentially, which is that if Benjamin Netanyahu signs up to a deal that they don't like, then they're going to torpedo his government. They're going to walk away from it and collapse the government, which would presumably preempt early elections, which the polls suggest that Netanyahu would lose. Now, as you say, Netanyahu has come out with a statement on these talks. It's a non-committal one, but he has talked about the Rafah operation. Let's hear exactly what he had to say just a short while ago.
Today I received a detailed report on the talks in Cairo. We are working all the time to achieve our goals, which includes the release of all of our hostages and achieving complete victory over Hamas. This victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terror brigades there. It will happen. There is a date.
So what we understand is that, prompted by the far-right ministers, there is going to be a meeting tomorrow in Israel of the war cabinets plus an expanded group, which includes Smotrich and includes Ben Gvir. They, we can bet, are going to be putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, at least to tailor whatever he signs up to so that it's in line with their expectations, either that or not sign up to any deal at all. So this peace deal that has been talked about in Cairo is still very much hanging in the balance.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Rory Challenge there for us in occupied East Jerusalem. Well, we can talk now to Patty Culhane. She's at the State Department in Washington.